Hello everybody, welcome back to another light novel review. Today I am talking about volume number 1 in Kanata Yanagino's light novel series, The Far Away Paladin. This one published by J Novel Club, currently only available in ebook format. In a city that is abandoned and decaying, a single living human exists, an infant named William. And he is raised by 3 undead: a skeletal warrior named Blood, a mummified priestess named Mary, and a spectral magician named Augustus. Now, as Will begins to grow, the mysteries around his existence become a much bigger part of this story. Who is he? Where did he come from? And why is he the only living thing in this city of the dead? Now, The Faraway Paladin is probably the closest thing we have to high fantasy of all the light novels that this sort of current generation has had released in the English market. Also, one of the things that I think should be mentioned right up front, and I wasn't aware of this novel is an example of sort of a subgenre of the isekai. So isekai, of course, being swept away to another world, usually dealing with a modern-day Japanese youth who finds themselves somehow transported to a fantastical world. In this one, the sort of subgenre of that is reincarnation. So a character who dies in the modern world and then is somehow reborn in a new fashion into another world. Now, what I really appreciated about this story is that it is thematically very different than a large number of isekai stories that we have. A lot of those stories focus on our main character trying to figure out either A, how to get to back to their home world, B, sort of at least just trying to figure out why they've been swept away to this new world. And often there are harems, often there are all the mechanics to do with sort of how a character becomes stronger, how a character learns magic. All these things are usually mechanics that are appropriated from RPGs, and more specifically like console type RPGs or PC RPGs, characters leveling up, magic point usages, stuff like this. The Faraway Paladin does away with a lot of these things. The Faraway Paladin has a character who sees his former life as a mistake and is trying to live this new life, realizing that he has another chance, is trying to live this new life to the fullest extent that he can to sort of atone for the mistakes that he feels he made in his previous life. This story does away with that whole RPG mechanic. Will is trained to do the things that he is capable of doing. Magic in this world is an integral part of the creation story of this world. It's not magic points. It's not some kind of contrived system that really makes no sense why it would ever exist. It is something that is organic, and even the limitations of that magic system and why it can sometimes be dangerous make complete sense in this world. The other thing is that there is no harem. Really, the bulk of this story revolves around the 4 characters that I've mentioned, these 3 undead adults and this young child that they are raising. In many ways, this volume, and I mean, I can't speak for the rest of the series, I've only read volume 1, but in a lot of ways, this volume is an origin story. It is about this individual who is filled with regret and remorse from a previous life, who dedicates himself to becoming the absolute best person that he can be in this life and in this new world, and dedicating himself to trying to master all of these things that these surrogate parents are trying to teach him. And we have a world that is built. This isn't, in a lot of ways, I find sometimes that the swept away to another world stories and light novels that we've been getting, the world building sort of seems to happen gradually, that we discover more about the world as characters go out into it. And really the only thing that we learn in the first novel often is just how the RPG type mechanics are going to work. In this book, we have the creation story. We have a pantheon of gods and goddesses. This feels, like I said, it is probably the closest thing to an actual high fantasy type novel than we've had so far. It feels like a world that we understand the rules once we finish this novel. Gods and their influence are a very real thing. The creation story of this world, the magic system and all of these other components feed into that. Even this whole concept, I mean, the book is told narratively from a first person point of view, from Will's point of view. And so this whole thing that he retains some of his memories and sense of his old life, obviously you could say it's a bit contrived because it's a mechanic that allows an infant to be able to narrate a story, which they would be incapable of doing at that level. But it is eventually explained in an incredibly simple and, I felt, kind of beautiful way sort of later on in the book. Like, this is not one of those books that baits you with a whole lot of little nagging questions about things. By the time I finished this book, I didn't wonder why Will was in this city. I didn't wonder how he came to be reborn into this world. I didn't even wonder why he had retained some of his memories. The only thing that I found myself wondering and kind of excited about was, where does his story go from here? And I guess that's really what I'm saying when I say this is an origin story, much in a different way than a lot of other of the isekai books that we have had so far. I mean, we know who Subaru is. We know who, Kirito, even though it's not quite the same idea, but we do know who he is. We, even just recently when I read Konosuba or even Overlord, all of these things, we are baited with the mystery of how these people came to be in this world. Like I said, that doesn't happen in this one. And it was refreshing. I just found this book such a different take. Like, to me, it felt like a light novel written by a fan of hard fantasy, and even the author mentions that he's a big fan of like tabletop gaming, so Dungeons and Dragons, that type of stuff, where the game itself is about constructing a story and then playing it through. And so it's almost like he's coming from a slightly different headspace, I'd say, than some of the other authors that we've had translated into English in the past sort of year and a half, 2 years. And it's really, really entertaining. I found that I was really engaged with this book because it's a very small cast of characters. They have a very distinct personality. And because we have a main character who really uses his previous life more as an example of what not to be, as opposed to trying to make this world conform to his preconceived notions based on his previous life. It was really a different emotional feel. And like I said, when it gets to sort of the end of the book, I thought there was some really good payoff in terms of that emotional investment that I had in all of these characters. So the Far Away Paladin is very different, I would say, than a lot of the light novels we've had in the past 2 years. It is, I think, something that fans of more pure fantasy, Western fantasy type novels could probably get behind a lot more. And especially, like I said, because the character earns all of the stuff that he has. There's no tricks of point manipulation or anything like that. I mean, this is a child who becomes who he is because of how he's been raised and trained and taught. So it's a very different feeling than a lot of the other books that we've had. And I've said that a million times, I know, and I'm sorry to be repetitive, but it's really the thing that I think stuck with me so much as I was reading the book was that this feels different. And even when I finished it, I was like, that was a different reading experience than a lot of other light novels that we've had. And even though I'm not going to say that the different things in it were incredibly original, like even the magic system, I don't know that I would say it is entirely original. It felt at home in this world. It didn't feel like somebody saying, well, I love RPGs and I want my world to have these, but so I'm just going to kind of, hammer in the square peg into the circular hole to make it fit. It really felt like all the things that were going on belonged in the world, that they conformed to the rules of the world. Like I said, the world building I thought was done in a lot stronger fashion in this book than it has been in a lot of the other books that we've had so far. I really, really recommend the Far Away Paladin. And I can almost say it like without reservation. Like I know I often with light novels, I'm like, well, some people will like this, some people won't like this. If you like this kind of stuff, you will. I think really the only thing I can say is that if you absolutely despise fantasy, then yes, this is not the book for you. But if you enjoy fantasy, if you like fantasy, if you love fantasy, especially if you love more of the sort of European and Western takes on fantasy, your Lord of the Rings, sort of Shannara, that type of thing, I think this is probably the light novel that is going to speak to you the most that we have had released, at least in the past sort of year and a half, 2 years, that I've been reading and reviewing light novels. So those are my thoughts on volume number 1 of The Far Away Paladin, a really compelling sort of fantasy origin story that left me more excited just about a main character's journey and what world awaits him, as opposed to scratching my head kind of wondering how the heck he got himself into this situation. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with that, I'm just saying we've had a lot more of those types of stories than what I saw in The Far Away Paladin. So my next review, I'm going to start reading, catching up on some of my volumes, like later volume releases. So I'm going to be reading volume number 5 of Do Ra Ra Ra, especially because volume number 6 releases in March. So I kind of have to get caught up. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of catch up. I'm hoping to have that review up Friday. I'm trying to do light novel reviews on Monday and Friday, post those videos. That's my goal. I'm trying to make that happen. We'll see how it goes. So anyway, if you're brand new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to check out all of my previous light novel volumes, I've got a link to that as well. I really appreciate you joining me on this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, bye-bye for now.